Welcome back to the Hard Truth Distilling Company studios on this Monday, getting your sports week ready to go. And it is going to be a big week. It is at Bloomington because it is homecoming for the Hoosiers. And of course, they have an already sold out Memorial Stadium awaiting them to take on the Nebraska Cornhuskers on Saturday. The night before that, you have Hoosier hysteria tipping off the basketball season for both the men's and women's program. It is just going to be a big week. Indiana up to 16 in the AP poll. I know that I don't know exactly where Nebraska is, but they're probably 26th or 7th right there, but just outside of it. But this is going to be a great game no matter what. It's going to be Indiana's toughest game they've played this weekend. We saw some great games in the Big Ten, and your Penn State Nittany Lions were right there amongst them. As a matter of fact, getting a gigantic win at the LA Memorial Coliseum over the USC Trojans in a tight game that went to overtime, 33-31. And Penn State is able to pull that game out, which is huge for them in a lot of different ways. And a lot of people threw up different comments that, well, yeah, they had it, but you could say that either way. And that's about the schedule. See, Tom, I don't know that it was exposed. I mean, you're playing against Lincoln Riley and some good players here.
Yeah.
Their offense, Jason says it's crazy. Our offensive coordinator was Buffalo Bills coordinator, does a great job. So it's winning that game was huge for Penn State because they have to play Ohio State yet. Let's see what their remaining schedule games that they have. They travel to Washington, which shouldn't be an issue, but playing at Washington, that is a home advantage.
No, they got Washington at home. They're at Wisconsin. They're at Wisconsin, home to Ohio State.
I'm sorry. I'm reading Wisconsin and saying Washington. Washington's right below there. That's why. But just coming up in 2 games, Ohio State comes to Happy Valley. And again, an advantage Penn State because they'll get them in Happy Valley. But I still think Ohio State is the best team in the Big Ten. Clock management issues just bit them in the butt against this weekend. And they probably should have won that game, to be honest with you.
Yeah, definitely should have won that game. I think what was I going to say? I'm sorry. I only caught part of it. I saw we had a wedding this weekend, but the caught the highlights at the end. And obviously, the Will Howard deal is just a rough deal. I mean, he just didn't. If he's got to remember, have the clock in his head to know when to slide. And if he does it 2 seconds earlier, they're in position for a kick. And he was obviously in position to slide 2 seconds earlier. I mean, he was just getting a little bit more, getting downhill a little bit more, pushing a little bit more, thinking he had just a little bit more time than he did. And so if he gets down, they've got a chance to make a kick and win the thing. And, so obviously that's tough too. Obviously they're right there and you look at it and say, okay, well, Ohio State's just as good as Oregon. To be able to play like that with them on the road. And obviously Oregon is getting, first place, number 1 overall votes this week. And so, yeah, that's going to sting, but I do believe they're just as good. And if you run it back at the end, if they end up playing in the championship game again at the end of the year, Ohio State can certainly win that game and put themselves back in contention, and back in a bye playoff spot. It could certainly happen, but it could not. But won't, obviously in Penn State's case, it's if you survive and they don't, then you have the advantage just in terms of where you stand. And all you got to do is all you got to still do is beat Ohio State, which was the point anyway. But just like you couldn't lose to somebody else if they. If they run the table and the only team they lose to is Ohio State, they'll still get in the playoffs. That was kind of the big thing. I mean, USC is probably the second best team that they play. Illinois was ranked, USC wasn't. I still think USC is probably a better team if those teams played straight up. But yeah, I mean, so that's important. So they've you've certainly seen other teams get tripped up along the way. That everybody else has gotten tripped up or close to it. And so there's still opportunities for that. I mean, they still, like you said, Wisconsin is a team that they could absolutely go on the road and lose to. Washington, I think, is a team they can lose to even at home. Washington's played pretty well. Minnesota has tripped some people up. They've got to play there on November 23rd. So, like, it's going to be freezing. It's going to be outside. I mean, there's not that it's not cold at State College in that time of year, but Minnesota cold is a different kind of cold. So yeah, there are going to be some opportunities for them to get tripped up, but they're standing 5-0. They're one of the teams that hasn't, had a stumble and fall so far. So, that puts them in better shape than, Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, LSU, Clemson, Notre Dame, Tennessee, a lot of teams that were expected to be right there that have for some reason or another lost a game, and in most cases lost a game that they probably should have won. That puts them in pretty good shape. And so, again, they still got to win the ones that are in front of them, and we can get too hyped up about who's where at this point when there's still a lot of games left to play out. And, again, USC is a vulnerable team, and so it wasn't like they beat some, it beating USC is not the same as what it would have meant if Ohio State beat Oregon. Like, Oregon's a better team, and drastically so. But all the same, going out there and winning on the road is big. Just keeping yourself undefeated so that you're not, again, that you don't lose an opportunity was a big deal.
I want to before I forget, big thanks to Brent at
Nice
Bison. Received that in the mail.
There you go.
Very cool. Very cool. But I just wanted to not forget that. But I appreciate that, Brent. Guys at Nice Bison, they have some great stuff, man. There is a scenario that I think is very, very plausible, Dustin, and that is one now with Oregon winning the game that they won this weekend and their schedule. I could see them going 12-0. They have a manageable schedule. I think Penn State will lose to Ohio State when Ohio State comes to visit, but I think Penn State will go 11-1. I think Ohio State will go 11-1. I think Indiana will go 11-1. So I think you're going to end up with a 12-0, the exact scenario that I was thinking about weeks ago, except for I thought Ohio State was going to be in the position that Oregon is going to be in at being 12-0. But then you're going to have three other 11-1 teams.
Right.
Do all three of those teams get into the college football playoff?
Probably not. And it's going to be Indiana that gets left out, and everybody's going to be mad about it.
Yes, it will be. And it will be because Indiana's loss in there that I'm figuring is going to be at their second last game of the year.
Right.
So timing is not going to be great. But I have noticed that when an SEC school loses, they don't move them far. Alabama lost to Vanderbilt, and they dropped to 7th. Yeah. I'm like, that's a joke to me. Are you kidding me? And then they should have lost this weekend to South Carolina.
Yeah.
Won the game.
I mean, obviously I still we go back to my thoughts on polls is that, again, basically, I mean, there's you look at who gets a vote, and I had a vote. And, it just comes down to the idea that, when you're filling this vote out, it is the last thing that you have to do, and it is not your job. What this is a thing that you just take on as a responsibility because it's cool. And you remember, when you got to watch college football when you were a kid, and it was the idea of having an AP poll vote seemed really cool. But it's the last thing you have to do after you have to cover the team that you cover all day. And you barely get to watch any football other than the game that you covered. You are locked in on that game all day, and whatever travel you got to do, all that kind of stuff. You get home at the end of the night. If you're lucky and you covered a noon game that day, you get to cover a West Coast. You get to watch a West Coast game at night. You get to watch highlights. You look at box scores. But at some point, you got to go to bed and get up the next day, and because you just wrote God knows how much today. And the AP vote is not like you get a day to watch it and figure it out. You don't get all day Sunday to watch tape, or something like that. You jump in on it, and you're just trying to not get killed on Sunday morning whenever your poll gets publicly released. And so, especially at times like this when it's October and everything's shaken up and not everybody's played everybody, there's not always justice, And the thing about it is once there's still going to be a lot of movement, everybody's still going to play everybody, and by the time it's all said and done, and you're actually looking at full resumes, and people have actually played everybody. Then it's a different ballgame, but who is number 1 in the AP poll in October, who's number 5 in the AP poll in October, does not matter.
Nope.
Not relevant. Doesn't have any bearing. Does not do with college football playoff. Again, the people who put the college football playoff rankings, you can question their motives as much as you want, but they get to watch all the games. Like, that's their deal as far as that position is concerned. They get to watch everybody. The people that have AP votes have other jobs. Like, their job is not to be an AP poll voter. Their job is to be beat writer of such and such team. So again, like, what you're trying to do is just not get skewered when you wake up Monday morning. That's what you're going for. You just don't want your inbox to be flooded with people that are mad. You're just trying to be as safe as you can. Because again, it's not a secondary responsibility. It's a deeply tertiary responsibility for you. So like, it is not going to be scientific. Like, you're basing it on the wisdom of crowds here and saying like, well, if you've got 65 of them, then they'll, come up with something that's reasonable. But, like, you're going to have stuff that's argumentable because it is not the primary responsibility of anybody who's voting. So, like, it is, you have another job and you are doing that job all day Saturday. It's different. Even basketball is different because when you're covering basketball, you have all week to watch and you have the 2 games that you cover or whatever, but you have the rest of the week to watch college basketball and get a sense of who belongs where. Like, you get more educated when you're filling out a college basketball book because you have all week to watch basketball. You are working all day Saturday, and you might get to watch a Thursday game, you might get to watch a Friday game, you might get to watch a late Saturday night game, but for most of the games that are being decided, you're not even watching. So, because they're happening when you're working, and it is what it is. So, like, it's not going to make perfect sense, and they're going to be safe with a team like Alabama. They're going to take them down a couple notches, but remember that they're Alabama, and they just beat Georgia too. So, like, college football is madness by its definition. Ergo, you have to figure out, what do you do with a team that beat Georgia and lost to Vanderbilt in consecutive weeks? How good is that team? You have no idea, so you throw them somewhere you're not going to get in trouble.
If the SEC and Big Ten both had 4 teams in, of course, that leaves 4. That's 8, and that leaves 4 spots. I guarantee you Notre Dame's going to get one of those spots because it's Notre Dame. So now you've got 3. ACC champion guaranteed one of those spots. I think the ACC runner-up does not get in. I think it'll probably be Clemson. That'll be a second loss at least. And I don't think that they're going to ignore, at that point, as hard as it will be for Indiana to get in. If they are 11-1, you've got to put them in over a 2-loss Clemson team, I think, if their only loss is to Ohio State. Right. These are all if scenarios. Sure. The Big 12 is going to get, let's say it's Iowa State, because Iowa State is 9-0 right now. So, 6-0. They don't. Nobody's
9-0 right now.
I can't read anything. 6-0. They're undefeated. Yeah. So let's just say that's their entry. Then you've got the group of 5, which is crap. I don't believe in you're just putting a team in just because it should be the top teams, but that's subjective regardless. But I'm trying to figure out who that would be right now.
Boise State, probably, right?
And I was getting ready to say, I said Iowa State. That's going to come down between BYU and Iowa State. Both of those teams undefeated right now. So you could have, an undefeated and a 1-loss team there. That would be problematic for, say, in Indiana. Boise State, at number 15.
And they've got a Heisman Trophy candidate and probably the front runner right now, so they would probably get that group of 5.
So it's going to be very tough for Indiana to get in, going 11-1, and that sucks to say that, because that's got to be the greatest turnaround in college football history. I know there's a Hawaii team that was 3-9 back in the 90s, and then went 9-3. Yeah. Or no, they didn't win a game. They did not win a game in the 98 season, whatever, and they won 9-3 the following year. 12-game turnaround. That's not what I'm talking about. To me, there is no greater turnaround in the history of college football, because this is the worst program in D1 history. They have the most losses. They brought in Jerry DiNardo, Sam White, Cam Cameron, It all failed. No one has been ever able, and even Bill Mallory had his success, but that was in a different time, and they were never dominant like this.
Right.
So this is the greatest turnaround to me in college football in my lifetime for certain. And
I will throw out a counter at another team that I think belongs in this.
Counterpoint.
Northwestern 95. And the reason I say it's like the portal has changed it in such a way. I think I give points to groups that had to do it organically.
Doing it at Northwestern is very difficult.
Draw a line. Like this is a new era of college football for how you're judging this. Basically, is that there are things that you could absolutely not do in 1995 that you could do now to turn around a program. I mean, and like that's not taking anything away from Kurt Cignetti. I mean, like he's just, and if they go 11-1, there's a lot of water still to pass on the bridge. I mean, I think there's a lot of times we have theoretical arguments about what can happen in the middle of October that are based on if every game goes the way I think it's going to go, and the favorites all win. But that doesn't happen. Like things get shaken up. I mean, like Indiana could easily find itself. Penn State could blow a game. Oregon could blow a game. Again, like I am still dumbfounded that Alabama lost to Vanderbilt. Like I wasn't watching that game.
Everybody else
pop up on my phone. I was like, that can't be a real thing. I was like, that's got to be a different sport, right? Like that can't be football.
But didn't the near loss to South Carolina say, man, maybe this Alabama team is just not that strong?
I mean, it could be that, but in the same way, like so. You're going to find out. Again, that comes back to why you don't mess around with it if you're a voter. Because it's like, if Alabama's not that strong, guess what? They've got Tennessee, Missouri, and LSU in a row. And so if they're not strong, they're going to lose one of those. If they run the table on that, then they're going to be right back in it. But they got to play all those games, so in a row. And then they've still got Oklahoma and Auburn. They've got, Mercer, who, they basically throw in there towards the end of the year, but they've got Oklahoma and Auburn during the end of the season. So, like they got 5 brutal games. Like if Alabama's bad, if Alabama's actually bad, they could lose all 5. And, then they've got 6 losses. So
Indiana fans need to hope for 2 losses for more SEC teams to pick up an additional loss.
Right. I mean, and some of them are going to, because again, like you're there, some of them are playing each other. I mean, Alabama plays Tennessee, Tennessee has looked very, vulnerable, but, so one of those teams is probably going to be eliminated, more or less. Now, again, I mean, I'm sure the general thought is that the SEC still gets a bonus over, over the Big Ten at this point. But yeah, I mean, Texas and Georgia are going to play, next week. That's going to be a massive, massive football game. So, Georgia could end up with 2 losses out of that. Texas could end up with a loss out of that. So yeah, a lot's going to happen. I mean, like, again, if you're Indiana, you just got to trust that there is chaos. I mean, don't presume you're going to be 11-1 until you're 11-1, and don't presume you're going to get left out at 11-1 until you get left out at 11-1. Like a lot can happen,
I'm just having fun.
Yeah. So, I mean, enjoy it while you can enjoy it. Don't think too far ahead of it, because a lot of stuff can happen. And this has been a wild year already. I mean, like there's, you're obviously like, your top 3 are undefeated, but you've got 4 and 5 or 1-loss teams. Like everybody that's after that is beatable. Everybody that I look at that's undefeated is a beatable undefeated team. And, who plays what, who plays who, like there's a lot of things that could shake out, and basically, I mean, Indiana's got to get started by beating Nebraska. Like that can't be, they can't get anywhere past that, because that's not a lock. You got to be able to win that thing. So, and go from there.
Yes, Texas is the team to beat right now because they're number 1, and they have not relinquished that. But what I am loving about college football is that there is no unbeatable juggernaut. Texas looks good right now, but they haven't finished their season. Let them finish their season.
They've got Georgia Saturday. I mean, like if you're going like now, if they beat Georgia, do I think they're running the table? Yeah, I do. But then they had to play an SEC championship game. They might have to play Georgia again. They might have to play Alabama. They might have to play Tennessee. I mean, like, you don't know what they're going to look like if they manage to win that game. They get them at home, which is helpful. But I mean, like, Georgia's good. I mean, that's my reason for thinking that Alabama must be decent at least, because like they beat Georgia.
Well, guess what? Georgia has to go to, or Texas has to go to Vanderbilt after Georgia. So,
yeah, and so that's not nothing either. Exactly, they could go beat Georgia and then get beat by Vanderbilt in Nashville. Like you apparently that's a thing that happens to great teams now. I didn't know that was a possibility, but Vanderbilt's 4-2. Like you want to talk about a team that's one of the worst in history. I mean, I know Indiana's got a worse record, more losses, historically. But I mean, Vanderbilt is
mind-boggling that is the case. But yeah, and then in addition, Texas has not an easy schedule. Florida is not going to be tough. They'll get them at home. They have to go to Arkansas. They get Kentucky at home, but Kentucky has kind of been a weird team, man.
Sure.
Jekyll and Hyde. They go to Ole Miss and win, and then, but they finished their season at Texas A&M. That is a wild card game.
Sure, you're bringing that rivalry back, in full force now that it's an SEC rivalry,
and it matters. It matters.
It's going to really, really matter, and A&M is going to knock them off. If Texas is undefeated, A&M is going to want to beat them so badly that you can't even imagine. So yeah, it's going to be. There's a whole lot of water to run under this bridge, man. I mean, there's just a lot that can happen. And I again, like to your point, there's not a juggernaut, so that means nobody's unbeatable. So you can't pencil anybody in at 12-0.
Dustin Dopirak, I know you've got to go. I appreciate you with all your time as always, man. It is always a blast getting our Mondays started off with you. Appreciate you, brother.
Thank you, sir.
Make sure you're giving Dustin a follow and keep it up with all the Pacers action at the Indy Star.